We have tons of fun experimenting with and developing sounds here at Sounds Like a Drum. Sometimes we even surprise ourselves. Today, we're going to go even deeper than we ever have before to see what we can get out of these instruments. If nothing you just heard in that intro is inspiring to you, that's okay. You don't have to keep watching this. Not every video is for everybody, but today we're going to be going in a direction we don't normally go. Ordinarily, when we make videos, we're dealing with raw drum sounds, and often we're trying to just make a beautiful sound or an expected sound or the optimal version of a sound. If you've seen any of our videos before this one, you've probably heard some or all of the drums that you see in front of you, and you heard them make an expected drum sound. This is going in the furthest opposite direction. We are looking for inspiration by getting as far from standard as humanly possible. In keeping with this ethos of inspiration through sound, you're going to be hearing some examples today that actually have some post-production applied to them, including the very first one at the top of the video. The reason that we led with that is that sometimes the sound we want to end up with is not just the raw sound, but we have to be thinking about our hoped final product when we start to affect the drums, especially if we're planning to record them and do stuff to it afterward. Today we're going to break down each of these drums and how we affected them for anyone who is curious to step outside of that box with us. Let's give a listen to the raw, unaffected acoustic sounds, and then we're going to discuss how we achieved these. The snare drum is tuned in a fairly standard way. In fact, we didn't even really check it. We just put a piece of canvas on top made by Big Fat Snare Drum to fully deaden it and give us a fat sound. We also made some conscious adjustments to the snare wire tension to treat it more like a sustain knob rather than actually adjusting snare response. For the rack tom, we felt like it could be an accent drum, a bright sound, a shorter sound that could jump out for little moments and otherwise stay out of the way. For this, we went for a high tuning, but we also removed the bottom head and the bottom hoop to further take away any sustain that it might generate. By removing the bottom head of the drum, it gives us a timbale kind of sound, but rather than going down into an Afro-Cuban direction or something of that kind of flavor, it evoked a dub vibe for us, which really lent itself to some effects after the fact and also affected the choices I made when I was performing on it. The floor tom was the biggest surprise out of all of these. We actually left it tuned as it was, fairly standard floor tom. However, we have a drum head from a previous experiment in a previous video that has most of the center of it cut out, effectively making it a ring, but with a hoop still attached. We placed this ring with hoop inverted onto the batter head so that when I strike it, it muffles, rattles, and also focuses the low end of that drum. In hearing the acoustic sound of this, we wondered what would happen if we made the sound more aggressive through post-production. So we added an overdrive effect to it, kind of a distortion, and it really drew out the rattle and the crunchiness of that sound. A listener expecting a more traditional floor tom sound might hear that rattle and really hate it, just think to themselves that they would love that drum if only that rattle wasn't there. This is exactly the sort of experimental scenario where we can take this bug, decide that it's a feature, and figure out what to do with it from a creative standpoint rather than just wondering how we can get rid of it. By leaning into this sound, it really changed the way that I played the drum in particular, because the sustain of the overtones and the rattle, it made me want to play less notes and treat it more like an accent or like a longer tone that filled across as I moved around the rest of the kit. Once we put some effects on it after the fact, it also reminded me of an instrument called a vibra-slap, which if you've never seen one, you've probably heard one. It basically is just rattle, and anytime you hear that kind of thing, it can evoke a memory or an inspiration that'll drive you to play more and see what the thing is capable of. The least differently affected drum on the kit today is actually the bass drum, because again, we wanted this one to have a more traditional sound and ground everything while still not having too long of a sustain and fit into these dubbier and more electronic vibes that we were going for once we started to affect the sounds. This resulted in leaving the heads as they were, which is to say full batter, ported reso. There is a pillow inside that's touching both heads, but it's not touching them both too dramatically, so there's still some tone if I don't dig in, but I can also bury the beater if I want to. A quick note about the cymbals as well. We did make some slight adjustments, which is to say we put a jingle ring on the hi-hat to move it into percussion territory, and because we were going to be doing some effects that might have time-based elements, we went for a drier ride cymbal that would take up less sonic space. Later on in the week, there's going to be more demos of these sounds over on our Patreon, fleshed out with production and everything else. Follow the link below. It's the best way to help support our channel. It's fair to say that this is a conventional looking setup, but the sounds are very unconventional. Let's consider what happens if we forego everything that these are giving us in terms of inspiration and play something really pedestrian on them. Okay. This doesn't sound normal because the sounds aren't normal. However, this is exactly where some players might end up if they are uncomfortable with unexpected sounds for whatever reason. Part of what makes an unconventional setup work is the confidence we bring when we sit down to play that unconventional setup and steering into what it's giving us rather than being frustrated that it won't bend to our will. For many of you, this is going to require a fair amount of exploration and some time, and that's okay. That journey is really, really fun, and at the end of the day, it's going to make you excited to play, and it's going to show you new options with the drums sitting in front of you right now. These sorts of experiments do nothing to disparage traditional sounds and traditional drums. Just to be clear, not every song or every scenario calls for this level of exploration. However, if you want to be remarkable, remembered, if you want to do something different, you have to do something different, and it doesn't have to be super dramatic. Even being different by degree is enough to take you out of what everybody else is doing. More than once, we've heard comments like, oh, those sound like cardboard boxes, or I can't believe you used such nice drums to make that comparatively bad sound. The truth of the matter is, we actually don't have a lot of drums here, and these are the drums in front of us. We also don't have a drum set full of cardboard boxes or made of cardboard boxes. So ultimately, being able to get the instrument in front of you to do the thing you need is really the best case scenario. This also brings to mind the idea of a good sound or a bad sound, when in reality, the context and the desire of the player and the music is really what defines appropriate or inappropriate. This also doesn't mean that you can't play a stylistically inappropriate sound just to see what'll happen. There are no real rules here, only the rules that we make for ourselves. One of our favorite things about experimenting with sounds like this, especially on an otherwise traditional kit, is getting into a musical headspace and being forced away from all of the rote drumistic stuff that I would ordinarily think to play if the sounds were exactly expected and I was put in a more traditional or Again, pedestrian playing environment. Let's now take an opportunity to listen to a raw bit of playing and then into the affected version so that you can see how the choices that we made with the acoustic sounds fed into our ultimate audio product. The key players in the produced version of this groove are delay on the rack tom and overdrive distortion on the floor tom. These really accentuate the fundamental characteristics of the way that we set up these two drums and draw the character out in a really special way, really utilizing exactly what's going on with them, including that crazy rattle in the floor tom. These are effects that we would not have been able to get even if we had added overdrive and delay to the drums, if we hadn't set the drums up this way first. It's really important to remember that. Having a clear artistic vision for where you want to end up at the end of the whole process can really inform the choices you make at the very beginning, including how you play, how hard you play, and exactly what you play on the drums. It's really this simple. Boxes that we put ourselves in, we make them for ourselves, whether it's coming from external influences or if we're by ourselves and feel like we really just have to net ourselves in. Putting limitations on ourselves, even through choosing sounds that are uncomfortable or unexpected, can actually be a source of creativity and inspiration, provided that you're interested in being inspired and driven toward creativity. The next time you sit down at your drums, consider adjusting one of them out of your comfort zone. You don't have to do the whole kit like we did today. Do something crazy with your rack tom, do something crazy with your bass drum, and see what happens when you play what you're comfortable playing. Then, try to play something new.